It's March, the month of St. Patrick's Day, and since 1991, American presidents of both parties and numerous acts of Congress and the Senate have declared March as Irish American Heritage Month. The yearly presidential proclamation has always included the president calling upon all Americans to celebrate the achievements and contributions of Irish Americans to our nation with appropriate ceremonies, activities, and programs. Well, if you've been tuned in the last 3 weeks, you'll know that that's what we've been talking about. How the Irish Americans got here, why they came here, and how they've contributed to our society over the last couple of hundred years. In summation, briefly, they were driven off their land in Ireland, their home country, by the British Protestants who didn't like them. The British starved them. They had no alternative but to leave the island, and many of them did so as indentured servants on slave ships. They came to America and worked in whatever job they could find, and have kind of made a name for themselves. So last week we talked about how my family came here, and we're going to pick up that story today, beginning with my grandfather, William Kelley II, whose father before him had fled Pennsylvania after he had just married, came to Dayton, Ohio, worked as a grocer, and then moved to Indiana with his young wife, and in Richmond, Indiana, had the opportunity to study law, passed the bar, and opened a legal practice. So that takes us up to William II, my grandfather, who served stateside as a Navy balloon pilot during the First World War and graduated from Notre Dame Law School in 1919. He practiced law with his father in the firm that they founded together in Richmond, Kelley & Kelley. According to William II's brother, John, it was about this time that Kelley and Goelitz became acquainted. The Goelitz I'm referring to is the Goelitz Candy Company, and their family and the company history has been instrumental in helping my sister, Elizabeth Kelley Sersniak, Doctor of Jurisprudence, trace our family history. So the Kelleys and the Goelitz became acquainted, and William and John's sister Miriam became engaged to Walt Goelitz. Apparently Walt had neglected to ask my great-grandfather before giving Miriam a diamond. William Sr. positively refused to allow his daughter to marry outside the Catholic Church. If you've been listening, you'll know that there was a lot of anti-Catholic sentiment in America during this period. In 1923, William II married Reva Brown, and they had 5 children. Patty was born in 1924, the only sibling of my father's to attend his Protestant wedding. Some explanation may be helpful here. William III, our dad, had known and ignored Marcia throughout much of their childhoods. He came from a Catholic family with Catholic friends. She was the granddaughter of a Presbyterian minister and not the least bit interested in commingling with any Catholics. Somehow they became better acquainted after Dad came home from World War II. But before the romance went too far, he was recalled to active duty for another war. But absence does make the heart grow, and a long-distance relationship blossomed. Dad couldn't get any leave, so my parents planned to be married at the Post Chapel on Fort McPherson, Georgia. Everybody from Richmond was invited. Now, my grandmother, my dad's mom, Mother Kelley, a gentle and loving woman by most accounts, was genuinely fond of Marcia, my mother. But Marcia wasn't Catholic and had no intention of converting, ever. The grandchildren would likely be raised as Protestants. Mother Kelley considered this simply unacceptable and refused to attend the Protestant wedding. likely conducted by a Protestant army chaplain outside the sacred covenant which can only be conferred under the time-honored traditions. Not only did my Catholic grandmother skip the wedding, but almost nobody from Dad's family showed up, except for his big sister, Patty. Patty attended the wedding while everybody else in the family bowed to Mother Kelley. She took the midnight train to Georgia by herself, partied with the Protestants, and celebrated with a full-on Irish-style wedding. It nearly killed her mother. Patty married a farmer and seemed to adapt very well to a rural lifestyle. Every year, she canned these wonderfully sweet and sour pickles, sliced almost razor thin and put up with just the right amount of similarly sliced onion. We always came home from the farm with a few jars of Aunt Patty's pickles. The farm cousins have all turned out pretty good. The oldest kids were twins, and while the boy went to college, his sister ran off out west to live with some kind of preacher. It was the early 70s. Eastern religions had grown in popularity, and the hippie lifestyle was still fashionable. Another daughter is probably the only person in the world who still has her mom's pickle recipe. Her love of animals led to a career as a vet tech. The youngest son is the only member of our clan who remains in the Richmond area today. He and his wife live right across the road from the farm his grandfather started, the house where he did most of his growing up, and where both of his parents died. My dad, Bill III, came along 1 year after Patty, and then Kathy in 1928. Kathy was a wonderful woman, the mother of 5 boys, and for many years the family matriarch. Kathy was our sainted mother, had been friends in high school, while her husband, Jim Quinlan, was his dad's closest buddies. All but one of the Quinlivan boys are dead today. Jimmy, a former Jesuit who registered as a conscientious objector during the Vietnam War, retired to New Orleans and almost at once was diagnosed with cancer. He was undergoing chemotherapy the last time I saw him at his brother's funeral. Jimmy was the oldest of the Quinlivan boys, and at least for me, the most admired. His father had been a combat Marine during World War II, and it must have been taking a lot of guts for Jimmy to stand up to him and refuse to fight. COVID prevented a formal wake. Dad's little brother enlisted in the Marine Corps during the Korean War. He might have made a fighting Marine, but they didn't want to find out. He was too good looking in his dress blue uniform to consider for combat. Taller, very handsome, and much fuller than his big brother, our Uncle Tom had a jagged scar across his left cheek. He was the spitting image of G.I. Joe, America's fighting man from head to toe. The Marine Corps put him on exhibit, and he spent the war at the Marine Barracks in Washington, guarding the White House and marching with the band. No, Uncle Tom never saw combat. The scar was the result of an automobile accident during his high school years. It wasn't exactly an accident. Coming home drunk one night, he was chasing a cat down the street in his car. Cat ran up a tree and he tried to follow it. The cat, it's believed, escaped unhurt. The car, however, was totaled. According to the official history of the Goelitz Candy Company, Adolf Goelitz moved to Cincinnati in 1898 and opened the Goelitz Confectionery Company there. He was joined by a friend and neighbor, William Kelley, and eventually by Kelley's cousin Edward and by the younger Goelitz brothers Gus Jr. and Herman. These families became more closely tied when Edward Kelley, a Catholic, married one of the Goelitz sisters, Joanne, a Jew. Now, given what happened to my parents and the lack of support they received from their Catholic family, how's that for progress? The Kelleys had fled from starvation and discrimination in Ireland. They became part of a flotilla transporting refugees from a wasteland aboard a converted cargo ship. Some had been used in the past to transport slaves, and my hungry, sick ancestors, who may have spent everything they had just for the trip, were treated little better than freight on a 3,000-mile journey that lasted at least 4 weeks. Making his way into Philadelphia, Thomas Kelley encountered anti-Catholic, anti-Irish mobs. Homes and churches were burned in what became known as the Bible Riots of 1844. New York Archbishop John Hughes built a wall around Old St. Patrick's Cathedral in order to protect it from the native-born population, and stationed musket-wielding members of the ancient order of Hibernians to guard the city's churches. The discrimination faced by my ancestors wasn't subtle at all. Classified newspaper advertisements warned that no Irish need apply, and no dogs or Irish allowed. The image of the simian Irishman, a Celtic ape-man dripping with prejudice, was given new life by American illustrators and appeared in East Coast newspapers as well as national publications. Although stereotyped as ignorant drunks, loyal only to the Pope and poorly suited for democracy, the Irish saw an opportunity in the American political process. Their sheer numbers helped propel William R. Grace to become the first Irish Catholic mayor of New York City in 1880, and Hugh O'Brien, the first Irish Catholic mayor of Boston 4 years later. 80 years later, during my lifetime, another Irish American Catholic had run for president of the United States. John Kennedy had been a World War II hero after the PT boat he was commanding was destroyed by a Japanese submarine, and he's credited with saving the lives of 11 of his 13 crewmen. But he noticed early in the primary race for president in 1960 that all the Protestant districts were voting for Hubert Humphrey. He had pledged not to make religion an issue in this race because he thought it would hurt him. But the West Virginia primary was coming around, and West Virginia was about 95% Protestant. So during a rally one day, he told a crowd of people that nobody asked him if he was Catholic when he joined the United States Navy. The crowd fell silent for a few minutes, and then they erupted in cheers. Kennedy thought that one moment, that one statement, may have changed the attitude of the American people toward Catholics in this country. Which brings me back to my sister, Elizabeth Kelley Searsniak, Doctor of Jurisprudence, who has pretty much tried to renounce her Irish ancestry. A lawyer by trade, she's accustomed to dealing only with facts, with evidence. This tendency alone may set her apart from her Irish roots. The facts, you must always remember, should never get in the way of a good story, at least while you're spending time with me. So I said, the hell with your genetic test. Your father was Irish, like his father, and for him, and so on and so forth. For Christmas last year, my dear sister Libby, Doctor of Jurisprudence, while she never practiced that form of law, will never admit to losing a single argument in her entire life, gave me a gift of one of these ancestry tests. Well, that's when the fight started. Now, I happen to know about an ancestry test that was far more reliable than a test tube of saliva. Remember the ancient order of Hibernians? As far as I know, they don't guard churches anymore, nor do they pose as fronts for Irish terrorist groups like the Molly Maguires, but they're still around. These days, the ancient order of Hibernians, Hibernia, by the way, is Latin for Ireland, are focused on preserving Irish heritage, assisting Irish immigrants, serving their Catholic parishes, and, this may be a clue, working towards the unification of Ireland. To become a member, an applicant must prove only 3 things. You can only join their ranks if you're male, a practicing Catholic who's active in your parish, and you must either be from Ireland or direct Irish descent. Well, that should cinch it. If the ancient order of Hibernians will give me a membership card, it would at last once and for all establish my place in the Irish community. I completed their convenient online membership and waited. The Ancient Order has 2 chapters in Indiana, Indianapolis and South Bend. After about 2 months, I got first a series of emailed follow-up questions. I sent my responses back and almost at once got a phone call from the secretary of the Indianapolis chapter. I was a little suspect at first because I'd kind of expected to hear more of a brogue. The questions were pointed, most could be answered without any elaboration. This, I realized, was the important background investigation designed to weed out the Irish imposters who might be trying to infiltrate. A few weeks later, I was granted full membership after a thorough screening. Along with my membership card, I received a copy of a clipping from a 1908 Richmond newspaper. The article reported that my great-grandfather, Will Kelley, was running for re-election as state president of the Ancient Order of Hibernians and was scheduled to make a big speech on the Notre Dame campus. I was a legacy. Delta House had to let Kent Dorfman join the fraternity because his older brother Fred had been a Delta. Having a great-grandfather who was not only a member in good standing, but also a past president, and therefore not a dork like Fred, elevated me to at least an acceptable standard for membership. With an official Hibernian membership card, I now, and at last, had the confidence to take advantage of Elizabeth Kelley Cierzniak, Doctor of Jurisprudence, generous and thoughtful Christmas gift. I started getting suspicious as soon as I registered my sample and started getting these advertisements for all the other Ancestry services that are available. It was like my terrible experience with TurboTax last year, where they suck you in like a windshield sticker on a used car lot and then try to sell you undercoating and rust proofing and upholstery guard and a bunch of other stuff that nobody knows how it works or why anybody could possibly need it. After about 6 weeks, I got my results. According to this racket, I'm only 14% Irish. Remember, that's less than my sister, who was 22. We share the same parents, presumably, and have the same genetic lineage. We did attend different high schools, but that had more to do with racial integration efforts in the 1970s than with any sort of Joseph Mengele-style genetic research. Still, Elizabeth was pleased with the results when I finally revealed them to her. All this was very disturbing until I remembered a group of Irish friends from decades past. My longtime and childhood friend David Keller married a nice Catholic girl. He was raised Baptist. His fiancée is pretty devout and insisted early in their engagement that Dave convert to the Catholic faith. Who can say no to their fiancée at that point? Well, Dave fell in love with the Catholic crowd at St. Pat's. They were a fun bunch. On St. Patrick's Day, for example, a crowd would show up for morning mass. Instead of the usual recessional hymn, parishioner Ann Wiles would step up to the microphone in the choir loft and in a heavenly voice sing, "When Irish Eyes Are Smilin'." Afterwards, a group of 30 or so, with names like Gentry and Brown and Shockey, would adjourn around the corner to Miller's Tavern. Miller's always celebrated St. Patrick's Day in grand style, maybe because of their close proximity to the church. The group of revelers stayed until late in the afternoon when everybody would somehow safely get out to the Knights of Columbus for the annual St. Patrick's Day dinner party. Now I ask you, what could be more Irish than all that? Most of those people may not possess a single Irish gene. They may have no Irish descendants, no family tales of the Great Hunger or the Bible War, and Ann Wiles, who can bring a tear to the eye of any Irishman with her beautiful voice, could never become a member of the Ancient Order of Hibernians. But being Irish is not a genetic factor. It's a wonderful combination of charm, wit, congeniality, and melancholy, mixed in with some daydreaming, and while not being easily offended, possess a tendency toward violence. Being Irish is not taking yourself so seriously that you forget to love and live well. So you see, you don't really need to be a McKellop or a Kylie or even a Din to be Irish. Although, it never hurts to have a rosary in your pocket. For the Irish, Catholicism is more than just a religion. It's a matter of public identity. Every day should be St. Patrick's Day. And now, as promised, we've got another letter. This from Linda Barrett, who writes, "Thank you for your wonderful history of Valentine's Day and for trying to regulate everybody's sex life. My boyfriend spoiled me with candy, flowers, and chocolates, and when I told him I was giving up sex for Lent, he took them all back and gave them to my trashy sister. He also gave her an STD. So now I've found a new boyfriend and we're both looking forward to Easter." Well, you're welcome, Linda. Happy St. Patrick's Day, everybody.